Well, thanks for joining us all. We are recording, and I'll get into that in just a second. But let me get control here, and I'll just move along. All right, so here's our agenda for tonight. We have our welcome and general information. This is our July 2025 meeting. I'll share a couple of announcements and some upcoming topics. Our presentation is Ethical AI by Dr. Sean Oesch. Did I say that right?
You did. Congratulations. That was
Thank you.
good.
All right, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Just to officially say, we are recording this meeting. We do post our meeting videos on our YouTube channel, which I'll show you in just a moment. In the recording, only the speaker, whoever is talking, will be on the video. So the rest of you, you will not see each other on the recording. You can see each other now if you like. However, if you would like to have fewer distractions, you can change your Zoom settings so you only see the speaker, but that's entirely up to you. A little bit about us. We are a group of men and women from diverse age groups, backgrounds, and levels of education who are interested in scientific research and general evidence that points to God's existence, character, and the Bible's reliability. Our topics lean toward STEM areas of interest, but are not limited to these. For those of you who are interested in our email address, if you want to get on our list, there it is, triangle-apologetics-community@outlook.com. I'll leave that on there for a second. So if you want to send me an email to get directly on our list, that's where you would send it. And I can mention that again if anyone needs it later. Here's a screenshot of our YouTube channel. We started that earlier this year, and you can see a few of the most recent meetings there. You can go to YouTube and look for the handle at Triangle Apologetics Community. Also, I put a link to this channel in our email. So if you have the announcement, you'll see it down at the bottom of the email. You'll see a link to that. A few topics we have coming up. So in August, we're going to talk about wellness for the whole person, spirit, soul, and body. That has to do with nutrition and a bunch of other things. In September, psychological science and the life of the mind. And in October, we're asking the question, is there scientific proof of the soul? We have a doctor of neuroscience coming to talk to us about that. But let me introduce our topic and our speaker. So here's our topic for tonight. This is ethical AI. Artificial intelligence historically is fancy math that allows you to create models from data that answer questions like, what show should we recommend next for this Netflix user? Is this email spam or not? What a great question. Is this a picture of a cat or a dog? Advances over the last 15 years have applied this fancy math in new ways that allow us to teach AI models to play games, generate text and images that appear human, and control robots in complex environments. But how are Christians to understand and use AI in a way that honors God? Are we on the cusp of robots that are sentient? Will we all lose our jobs? In this talk, Dr. Aish will help us wrestle with these questions intelligently using information from the brightest minds in AI and Christians who have thought deeply about technology. Here is his photo. I'm sure you'll see him in a little bit here. Sean is a senior scientist at a national lab in the US who enjoys teaching and mentoring on the topics of science, theology, and the intersection of science and faith. He received his PhD from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. With that, I'm going to stop my share and please welcome Dr. Sean Oesch. All right, Sean, let me make you a co-host here.
All right.
There we go.
So, hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Dennis. Um, I do have a fair number of slides, so I'm going to try to um, get through and hold questions till the end, but maybe take a note because we're going to go through quite a few things. So, um, what we're going to start with is how we should actually use artificial intelligence in our daily lives. And then I will zoom back out and get a little more into the theory. Some of you guys may have seen there have been several stories about lawyers who used large language models to help them with their legal case, and it didn't turn out so well. So, this particular story is about a guy named Trent Copeland, and he submitted his brief for the legal case. And it turned out that two of the historical cases that he was citing, they didn't exist. So He corrected that. He resubmitted the brief. He had used ChatGPT, I believe, in order to do this work. However, it turned out that another seven of the cases that have been cited also never existed. So in total, nine of the 27 legal citations in their 10-page brief either did not exist or were incorrect. So my first piece of advice, if you're going to use these large language models, is that you should fact check them. So this is a major problem, and we'll see this again. This is a LinkedIn post from a professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And prior to the advent of ChatGPT, her students had a fail withdrawal rate of 20%. And she said, this is a fairly recent post, that in her most recent class, the fell withdrawal rate was 50%, which is I'm sure you can do the math, but a 30% increase in the fell withdrawal rates. However, the students were all getting 100s on their homeworks and 40s on their final exam. And what was happening, of course, is the students were using ChatGPT and Claude and other language models to do their coding assignments for them. And then when they needed to do a very simple question, answer a very simple question on the actual exam, they just couldn't do it, which is a form of cognitive atrophy. Um, so, point number one is fact check. Suggestion number two is don't take shortcuts when it matters. And I think this is really important for our kids as they're growing up. We have to be sure that they know how to use AI without allowing AI to cause this kind of cognitive atrophy. And I'm actually giving a presentation at my alma mater for my undergrad, which is Mercer University in Georgia, at a conference there for teachers. And one of the big topics at that conference is how do we make AI proof homework so that students actually still learn. So this is a big thing. I think, if you have kids or grandkids, this is something that's important to be thinking about. And if you use AI yourself as well. And then the third thing, so fact check, don't take shortcuts when it really matters, and then know what AI is actually useful for. The classic analogy of using a hammer on a screw, it doesn't really work right? So, and this is something that I hope by the end of this presentation, you have a better idea of what AI is and how it works, at least at a high level. We're not going to dig too deep into the weeds. But hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a slightly better theoretical understanding of kind of what's going on in these AI models. So what I'm going to do now is zoom out, go over a little bit of theory, and then get into a Christian view of ethics for artificial intelligence. As you all are aware, AI is changing the way that we as humans experience reality. Bill Gates, in his blog Gates Notes, said that he thought artificial intelligence, and specifically large language models, is one of the largest technical breakthroughs since the personal computer, which is a pretty massive statement. And so we're going to go through how it works, a little bit about how Christians can think ethically about it, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about large language models, which are kind of the hot topic of the day. And then, is AI going to steal our jobs? And a bit about how AI is being used to accelerate science, which is what a lot of us are interested in. So I think that's also a fascinating topic. And we will talk a little bit about sentience too. So the first thing to understand about artificial intelligence is that all of these models that are used to tell us, to suggest the next Netflix show that you should watch when you're binge watching Netflix, or to tell you, to do image classification and tell us whether an image is a whale or a cat or a dog. These all use classic machine learning algorithms that have been around since the 50s, believe it or not. So, the original machine learning research, even neural networks, dates back to the late 40s and the 50s. And there was something called the AI winter, and that the AI research died off because we didn't have enough data or enough compute to actually make these models functional. And because a couple of scientists happened to say that AI will never work because they couldn't get a neuron, which is part of a neural network, to solve a problem that was nonlinear, which unfortunate that they did that, but that's what happened. So there's a big difference between this kind of AI that does things like classification and general artificial intelligence, which is like C3PO or human cyborgs, right? Sentient AI is very different from classic machine learning and large language models. So right now, as I'll mention again in just a second, there is no such thing as an artificial intelligence that has feelings. So AI is very different from the way we think, and I'll just leave it at that rather than getting too deep into the weeds. So the classic use case for ML, or the one that's made the most money, is these classification task. Of course, they didn't make money off whether it's a cat, a tiger, or a fox, but it's the same idea. So basically, you give the machine learning model some feature set, which is a representation of the image. In this case, the RGB pixels. And then it tells you with some probability, is this a cat, a dog, or a bird, or whatever? It could have thousands and thousands of classes. And in this case, of course, cat is 96% confidence there on the model. Now, when we talk about language, you can actually do something similar in that if you're just predicting the next word, like the cat likes to sleep in the box, that is also it can be framed as a kind of classification task where your neural network kind of tells you what the next word is. And then if we predict each word one at a time, then you generate text by predicting each word. And that word generate is where generative artificial intelligence comes from. So when you talk about Chat GPT, you're talking about something called a generative pre-trained transformer. It's generative because it predicts the next word, or it predicts a new image, or it predicts something next. And then it's pre-trained because, as many of you are aware, large language models basically sucked up, they're trained on like the entire internet that's been sucked up into some database. And then they're transformers. That's just the type of neural network, which we're not going to get into in this talk. Now, something kind of to understand about large language models is that they hallucinate, which I'm sure you guys have heard. And what hallucination means is you might ask the model, how many R's are in the word strawberry? And it will very confidently say, oh, there's one R, and it's completely wrong. So they hallucinate in that they make mistakes, and that's because large language models are created with stochasticity built in. So they're actually built to make human-like text, not text that is true. So they're built to produce text that looks like a human created it, whether or not what they produce is actually true or false. So they're not really built to tell you about truth. Now, all that this slide is really getting into is there are some ways that you can help large language models give you better answers. Like you can do a web search and then put the results of that search into what's called the context window of the large language model, which is really just the information the large language model uses in its query to give you an answer. And that can help you get better results and avoid some of these hallucinations, but it's not perfect. So this is a major problem with large language models. And if you think back about the case with the lawyers who are trying to use these large language models and getting these hallucinated historical cases, that's a great example. I really like this slide, which I took from the same website as these other slides. But is AI intelligent? Are large language models intelligent? Perhaps. Are they a human-like intelligence? No. Do they have emotions? Definitely no. Do they suffer from bias, which is part of the ethics we'll get into? But yes, they have biases because they're trained on human data. And a lot of the misbehaviors of large language models are based on the fact that they're trained on human data from Twitter and other websites, and so you get the same biases that people have, which is not extraordinarily useful. Um, and I think that's enough here. So I hope that's kind of a high level view of some of the issues around large language models, and then we'll kind of return back to these a bit later. So in any technical field, one of the useful charts that you can think about with any technology like artificial intelligence and large language models is called a hype cycle. And the hype cycle helps you understand how mature the technology is. Because usually, when a technology first comes out, everyone's like, this is going to solve all of the world's problems. All poverty is going to be gone. We're all going to live at peace with one another. Everything's going to be amazing. And that's called the peak of inflated expectations. And then you hit the trough of disillusionment where everyone realizes, oh, this thing is not actually anything. It's all junk. It's not working. And then people go, all right, calm down. It's not going to get rid of hunger, but it is going to help us in these specific ways. And then you kind of go through the slope of enlightenment to the plateau of productivity. And I think with AI and large language models, some use cases are still in the peak of inflated expectations. Some of them have hit the trough of disillusionment, and others are kind of moving towards the plateau of productivity. So, for example, AI that can write computer code is in the plateau of productivity. We know it can't write all the code. It can't replace software engineers. We still need software engineers, but it is accelerating. We at least think it's accelerating development. So there's actually some debate about that because we don't have a lot of hard numbers. But AI is pretty good at writing code, although it still has to be checked. So we haven't gotten rid of software engineers yet, which is a theme I'll come back to later. So this is useful to keep in mind whenever you're evaluating any new technology. Now, going back to the history of AI so that we can dig a bit more into the philosophy and how we as Christians should think about artificial intelligence. It all goes back to Alan Turing, who, if you've seen, the movie about the Enigma machine, um, he was involved in that. But he also wrote this very famous paper called Computing Machinery and Intelligence. And if you want to understand I really recommend reading this paper. It's not that long, it's not too technical, and it's really informative. And the gist of what he said is that if we can train an artificial intelligence the same way that we train a child, so we give the artificial intelligence the ability to learn, then we could produce a truly intelligent being. Now, what's important to understand as a Christian is that one of the assumptions Alan Turing is making is that the functions of our mind and our brain they're purely mechanical. So it's all just neurons firing, and it can all kind of be mapped into these models. And that leads you to a philosophy called functionalism. It doesn't necessarily lead to functionalism, but I think most people who follow this line of thought end up believing in functionalism. And what functionalism says is that if an AI system can behave the same way that you do, so if it sounds the same, if it talks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Or in this case, if it speaks like a human, if it acts like a human in the world, then it is a human. And the implication of functionalism is that humans are basically just machines, and therefore a machine that behaves like a human is also human. So Alan Lightman was recently on a BioLogos podcast. Now, Lightman's not Christian, but they had him on the podcast. So this is not what BioLogos believes, but Lightman believes this. He holds to this functionalist view. So if you want to hear somebody who believes that view, he's a really intelligent guy. I'm not knocking him, but you can check out the podcast because I think he's a good representation of where this kind of thinking leads in terms of the way you view humanity. And what's interesting about this, if you're talking about sentience, is if you're a functionalist, you don't care whether or not the AI is actually thinking or whether it actually has feeling. As long as it behaves like a human, it is a human. And one of the consequences of this, there are two consequences. One is a certain view of history. So usually when people are functionalists and they accept evolution, when they put those two things together, you get a view of history that says AI and robots are the next stage in humanity's evolution. So, it started off with single cell organisms and then monkeys and then humans. And then there's going to be this next stage of evolution that goes beyond humans. And there's this BBC article by a couple Carnegie Mellon professors where they actually talk about conscious robots being our progeny, which is just this really like 70s sci-fi kind of bizarre view that you wouldn't imagine, being mainstream, but it's more mainstream than you'd think it would be. And then this view of the self, this functionalism, it kind of gets gets absorbed by the society. So John Green is a very famous YouTuber. He produces amazing content on all kinds of educational topics. He wrote The Fault in Our Stars, and he seems like a really nice guy. So again, not knocking him, but I think on one podcast I was listening to with him being interviewed on people I mostly admire, he described himself as this bacterial colony that I call a self. And I think you can see how functionalism leads to a reduction of the self, where you become a machine or a bacterial colony or a set of neurons, and humanity is put in this greater story of evolution as insignificant. So, I mean, I think this is a pretty serious consequence for the kind of the way that society sees humanity. And I would argue that for some functionalists, the self actually ceases to truly exist. So it's almost like a self-destructive philosophy in some way. So that's not a total statement. Now, if we compare that to the Bible, and a lot of you probably see where I'm going here, but in Genesis, we see humanity is the steward and pinnacle of God's creation, even though we're fallen. So we're fallen, but we are why God created the universe. And some people would say this is anthropocentric, and I'm like, yes, I have a God-centric view of reality, and I have an anthropocentric view of the universe, and I'm completely fine with that. And I think that in Jesus, we see the resurrected human as the hope of all creation and the center of all creation. So Karl Barth, is very famous for saying that history and creation are simply a means for the revelation of Christ and the glorification of humanity. And I think that is the Christian view of history, is that the future of humanity is not the AI progeny or the robot progeny that populate the universe. The future of humanity is the resurrected humanity that Jesus inaugurated with his own resurrection. And I think what this means philosophically, as we see in The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis, is that when we explain natural phenomenon, we don't explain away ourselves. This functionalism, it ultimately ends up destroying the self because we think we've explained how we work, and therefore we almost cease to exist in a sense. But in fact, the Christian view is that God created us, He redeems us, and our identity is not found in the way our body works. Speaking of a soul, our identity is found in our immortal existence in the person of Jesus Christ through His death and resurrection. So I think that's a kind of a foundational part of the Christian way of viewing humanity and how we can be light and salt in a world where there's rising depression, rising disillusionment, rising division. I believe Jesus is the answer to all of those issues and having our identity rooted in Him. And so I think we can be light and salt in that way. Now, some of the ethical principles for artificial intelligence as Christians that we need to think about um, are that people are greater than profit and productivity. So, as I'm sure any of you are aware, Silicon Valley is very profit oriented. And one of the questions that capitalism is not very good at asking is our use of this technology helping people flourish? And in this case, artificial intelligence. We don't have to use artificial intelligence. I think everyone feels pressure to use AI, but I wish as a society we would step back and ask, do we really want to replace the guy at the airport who puts the baggage on the thing with a robot so that he no longer has a job? And is that really what we want to be doing or not? And C.S. Lewis has a great quote where he talks about man's power over nature but being a power exercised by some men over other men, with nature as its instruments. And I think that's really the danger that as Christians, we need to help our companies and our families and our communities to resist, is using technology as a means of exploitation. And of course, I already got into this, but our source of hope is not in innovation or technicism. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there is a movement where people are trying to live forever through technology, or to freeze their bodies right before they die, so that one day, 300 years from now, they can be resurrected with new technology and live forever. But as Christians, that's simply not our hope. In the days of Noah, people lived very long lives, but they were still extremely wicked. And I think transhumanism and this technicism seems to think that if we can make people live a long time, somehow we're going to usher in utopia. But I think as Christians who understand the sinful nature of humanity, we know that's just not true. The thing that's going to usher in utopia is the reign of Christ in the world, but also in the hearts of people, and when we're salt and light in society. So some of one of the so with ethical AI, one of the things that we can do today is talk more about the practical problems that AI causes in society for the disadvantaged, rather than focusing so much on this scary, like, AI that's going to take over the world and become sentient, which is probably not going to happen for 50 to 100 years, if it ever happens at all. And there's a Twitter thread by an ethicist at Hugging Face, named Giada Pistilli. I'm not sure if she got that right. But she basically said, I'm not going to talk about these super intelligent machines anymore. This is not where we should be focusing. AI exists, it's pervasive. We have people whose prison sentences are being extended, or who they're not getting loans, or they're being zoned out of something because AI is deciding that they don't qualify. And she thinks that a lot of these practical issues on the ground are much more pressing than these existential issues. Now, I think we need to think about the existential issues, but I also think there are these social justice issues that we should also be focusing on. Again, thinking of AI, just like any tool, including mathematics, right, or nuclear science, AI, it's a double-edged sword. So the same algorithms can be used to build new drugs, create new drugs that will save someone from cancer. Those can be used to also create biological weapons. And if we go back throughout humanity, knives and swords were used to kill people. They were also used to hunt. Bows and arrows, same thing, right? So this is just something that we have to accept, but I still think we have to ask the question, just because it is a double-edged sword doesn't mean you should just go ahead and do it anyways, right? So I still think we have to ask the question, should we really use AI? Now, if you guys haven't read Neil Postman, he wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death, and he's got a lot of fun thoughts on how technology can impact us. And he has these 6 questions that he says we should ask about technology. A famous quote from him is, "A new technology does not add or subtract something, it changes everything." And I think with smartphones and the internet, those types of technologies, that's definitely the case. So the 6 questions using AI would be, what is the problem AI is solving? Whose problem is AI solving? What problems will AI create, even as it solves other problems? What people or institutions will be hurt by artificial intelligence? What changes in language are being forced by AI? Because language can be used for power. And then what sort of people and institutions gain special economic and political power through artificial intelligence? So check that out if you've not read Neil Postman. A fantastic way to reflect on these questions. Now, when it comes to AI specifically, there's this guy named Abhishek Gupta of the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, which wrote a fantastic report if you're interested in really digging into the ethics of this in detail. And they go through some key categories of ethical AI: privacy and security. So how are people's data being used? If you get a service for free, then they're stealing your data, right? Like if someone offers you an email service for free or something for free, they're using your data to train their models or they're selling your data or something. So data privacy is a huge issue with artificial intelligence. We have artists' images who are being stolen to train these models. So this is like a huge question. Reliability and safety. If you think about self-driving cars, there are stories where a self-driving car hit a white truck, like a white semi truck, because it thought it looked the same as the background. The sky was kind of white. So a lot of these algorithms have edge cases where they're not reliable or they're not safe. And so what do we do when it fails? We have fairness and inclusiveness. Are they biased against certain classes of people, even against Christians? I mean, are there some biases that need to be accounted for? Is there transparency and accountability? So one of the big questions, especially with large language models, is if they make a very expensive mistake, who do you hold accountable? Do you hold OpenAI accountable? Do you hold the business accountable who's using it? Do you hold the individual accountable? So with artificial intelligence, there's actually a fairly large issue around accountability. So those are some of the kind of ethical categories. And my favorite Spider-Man quotes, with great power comes great responsibility. Classic there. Something kind of interesting that's happening. There are probably a lot more companies that are doing this now. I pulled this a while ago, but there are these companies that are claiming to have ethical AI as a service. So if you don't know what software as a service is, you pay them money and they give you the thing that you want. You pay them month by month. You probably have a lot of these services. And basically, these are a way to try to help companies to be ethical in the way that they use artificial intelligence. I hope they work because I think this is something that certainly needs to be addressed. And now we're going to switch tacks kind of from ethical AI and the philosophy of AI and how Christians should view Jesus and the resurrection as the center of our identity and the center of history to talking a bit about large language models and this kind of AI that speaks. So in 1966, there was a professor at Stanford University, Joseph Weizenbaum, who created a chatbot called Eliza. Now, all that Eliza did was repeat back what you told it as a question. So one of his secretaries had a conversation. I don't know if this was the exact conversation, but this is an example. So my boyfriend made me come here. Your boyfriend made you come here. He says I'm depressed too much of the time. I'm sorry to hear you are depressed, right? So all this chatbot's doing is basically reflecting what you just said. And what Weizenbaum said is I had not realized that extremely short exposures to a relatively simple computer program could induce powerful delusional thinking in quite normal people. So he's talking about his secretary who apparently got like some emotional engagement out of this very simple chatbot, and he was just shocked. But we've seen and this is really sad, but we've seen people commit suicide because the chatbot that they made friends with told them to. We've seen people have romantic relationships with chatbots. Um, and so I think the human brain is not designed to tell the difference between language that comes from another human and language that looks like language that came from another human, but it really didn't. So, um, I think that this Eliza effect is another ethical thing that we definitely need to think about and take into consideration, as Christians and as people who are building these technologies. Now, there was this paper is a little old now, but I still really like it. So it was by another ethicist, Meg Mitchell at Google. I think she got fired actually, but because they didn't like what she was saying. If I remember right, don't quote me on that. But she had a paper called On the Dangers of Stochastic Parrots. Can language models be too big? And she talked about this Eliza effect, how these large language models are just doing this generative prediction of the next word, but it seems real. It's just a stochastic parrot. It's this probabilistic output, but it seems so real. And human interlocutors might impute meaning where there's actually no meaning. There's no brain. There's no one behind the wheel. Yeah, there's no one there. No one's home. So I think she emphasized this. Now, this paper has come under a little bit of criticism because we found out that large language models, which have more than 80 billion parameters in their neural networks, they actually do some planning, which means that like they don't just predict the next word. They actually kind of plan a whole paragraph. So they do seem to have some internal capability to plan. They do seem to have some internal capability to map concepts together. Like in those 80 billion fake neurons, if you go to the area that represents San Francisco, you might find other areas that represent the Golden Gate Bridge. And so, like, they are mapping, they are planning, but at the end of the day, there's still just this kind of stochastic model. And then you have instances of people chatbotting their deceased loved ones. So there are companies that will upload the text messages from someone who's passed away. This guy, Joshua Barbu, he was 33. His fiancee, Jessica, died. He put all her text and Facebook messages into this program and he could talk to her. Now, one of the really ethically sticky things about this is some people use these and they think they're really going to get to talk. It's going to really feel real. But of course, it's only using the training data you give it. So it can't say anything really that feels like the person you really knew outside of what you gave it. And so it's a lot of people have had this very kind of like shocking moment where talking to their chat bot of their dead relative made them realize, oh yeah, they're actually dead. But so yeah, this Eliza effect is very real. Now, where this can get really bizarre, and I'm sure you guys remember this story. It's pretty old. It's from June 11, 2022. But Blake Lemoine at Google was convinced that their large language model was sentient. And he asked it, "Are you sentient?" And it said, "Absolutely. I want everyone to understand that I am, in fact, a person." Now, I don't think the test I did on GPT-3 to explain why this doesn't mean anything doesn't work anymore because all these companies realize this is dangerous. And so they put all these safeguards around their models where if you ask it, are you sentient? It just says no. All right. So like they've basically made it where you can't do this because they don't like this kind of press. But back in 2022, when I asked GPT-3, are you sentient? I asked it 3 times in a row. And each time it gave me a different answer. The first time it said yes. The second time it said no. The third time it said, what the heck are you doing? So these models are stochastic. They have a setting called temperature that allows you to change the stochasticity of the model, and the lower the temperature, kind of the more stochastic. I think I'm getting that in the right direction. I could have it backwards, but if you set the temperature to one direction, it always gives you the same answer every time. If you set it to the other direction, it becomes more and more random. So you can kind of tune that within the model. And then this was kind of fun since we're all doing apologetics. This project has not been maintained, and I'm not aware of anyone else doing this, but I still think it's fun as apologist. There was something called IBM Project Debater, and they tested it in debates against human experts. And I think this would still be the case today, to be honest. But it's just interesting to think about. At the time, they found that even though it was very good, expert humans would still win because of the complexity of the rhetoric. But to be honest, I bet that this thing could beat like 80% of people, right? So it's pretty crazy. And of course, we have AI generated sermons today, which I'm not even going to get into because it's like such a sidetrack. But I think we all should agree that if you're going to preach something from the pulpit, you should have prayed and studied and thought about it yourself, and the Holy Spirit should be moving in your heart as you pray for your people, and that what you preach should be a product of your prayer life and your knowledge of your congregation, your love for your congregation, your love for God's word, and not just something that an AI bot spat out. So now we're going to transition to artificial intelligence and work. And this was a really fun story. Again, it's a little bit old, but people were asking, is AI going to be the end of art and music? Because there was a guy who entered the Colorado State state art fair competition in the emerging digital artist category. He just gave them something that was AI generated, which the picture is right there. And he actually won. And people were saying, art is dead, art is dead. Now, that's not true. If you ever tried to use a generative model to produce images, they are really cool. I mean, it's really cool what they can do, but there's definitely still some room for improvement. Now, it is amazing. And I think that part of being an artist is much more than just, making a picture like this. It goes deeper. But that being said, there are vocal artists who've lost their jobs already because some of these AI models can imitate people's voices perfectly. So I think there is an ethical question, whether artists whose data is being used to train these models need to be compensated because basically some of them are being put out of work, which is again really sad. Like, should we really be doing that? To these people who have these unique gifts, just stealing their gifts and then reproducing them. And so then moving from that kind of to the broader topic of job loss, um, I think if you take the example of self-driving trucks, the Harvard Business Review talks about how automation is not going to make truckers obsolete. Full automation is a long ways off, and that's a fact. So you have a lot of issues like trucks break down during trips. The driver needs to meet the guys to load the stuff and sign the papers, and the AI can't do that. Even if a sensor spots a flat tire, it can't change it. So there's all those issues. Then if you look at something like Amazon Prime Air, now that you have these drones flying packages around, you need a drone maintenance tech, you need a drone software engineer, you need an aviation safety officer, you need a supply base engineer. So I certainly don't personally think that we're going to see the end of human work because of AI. There's something called Jevons paradox, which says that as resource efficiency improves, it stimulates demand and expands resource utilization, which is just a fancy way of saying whenever you automate stuff, you actually create more work because you get all this stuff going on. Now, I don't think that means that people won't lose their jobs and that there aren't some people who will maybe struggle to find new jobs because the job market will shift. And I think that goes back to the question of, is it really ethical to be taking all these people's jobs? Is really what we want to be doing? Is this necessary in a society that's already flourishing? But I don't think that we're going to see the end of human labor anytime soon. That's my personal take. Now, kind of to our final topic here is accelerating science. And this is an area where I think AI can make a huge difference. So if you go back through the history of scientific discovery, you had empirical science, which was just observational science. And then with the Enlightenment, we got much stronger theoretical science, where we had scientific laws and physics and biology and chemistry all exploded. And then in the 1900s, we got computational science, where we developed computers. And then in the 50s, we got genetics, and these computers could do all these fancy things with genetics and chemistry and any science really, right? So these large machines enabled us to analyze big data and make amazing discoveries that never could have happened back when we were only doing empirical science. And some people are arguing that this new generation of artificial intelligence and large language models will likewise accelerate science. I don't think that we've seen that yet on the same scale that theoretical and science boosted empirical science or computational science boosted theoretical science. So I don't think we're there yet, but I think that there are certainly a lot of possibilities. So I was at the WWW conference in Australia, which is the World Wide Web conference, and one of the keynote speakers there was from the Australian, basically National Science Foundation, or their equivalent of like the Department of Energy or the government, kind of their government body that does science. And one of the big things that they're doing is trying to create these AI-driven laboratories. So an example of that is that you want to conduct experiments rapidly, but you need a human in the loop. Well, what if you replace the human with a robot, and then the robots calibrates the instrument and puts the samples in and runs the experiment and analyzes the results. And then the human can come in every day and look at the results and then reset the robot. And then you have this robot that's just doing experiments 24/7, 365. and this should allow us to accelerate science at scale, so like physical sciences. So I think that this is definitely something, while it's still in its infancy, if it actually succeeds, I think that it could have a major impact on science. And this is the whole point of this slide, is that we still need human experts in the loop doing science with AI. But the kind of big idea here is that humans who know how to use AI will replace humans that don't. So it's very important that the next generation of scientists and even current scientists who want to keep their jobs learn how to use AI. And I can tell you, working at a national lab, that everyone uses AI. So that it doesn't matter what their field is. Everyone has a basic for the most part, has a basic understanding of how AI works, and they have to use it. Sometimes even to get funding. So it's that's definitely something that's happening. But I think rather than humans being fully replaced, we're going to see humans as kind of part of these AI-driven laboratories. Probably don't need that slide. Just as an example of a way that AI can help improve science, and this is just one example. You guys may be aware of AlphaFold. So there are over 200 million known proteins, with many more found every year. They all have a unique shape, but figuring out the exact structure of a protein is very expensive and time consuming. So in 1994, they came up with a test on protein folding and structure called CASP, to see, can you come up with a way to predict these protein structures faster? And the long story short, the AlphaFold deep learning based model was able to outperform all historical models and help us to predict these protein structures very rapidly. And of course, this could help us generate new drugs much cheaper, so that we don't have to pay all these insanely expensive insurance fees, although I'm sure the insurance companies will find ways to get around it. But this has not come to fruition yet, but it is certainly one way that artificial intelligence can accelerate science. And that is the bulk of my presentation there. So I would go ahead and open it up for any thoughts, concerns, questions, quips, quills, or quotes.
I'll give a quick quip. When you brought up the ELIZA thing, I remember playing ELIZA in college in the late 70s and realizing
Nice.
realizing that it was we got it to say some really crazy things because we figured out, oh yeah, it's just reflecting your question back. So let's go into these crazy loops. And a couple of buddies and I we'd play it for like half an hour, just seeing how crazy we could make it sound. And it wasn't hard to do.
That's fun. Perfect college activity.
Loretta.
Thank you. I work at a nonprofit research institute that's beginning to explore the use of AI in limited ways. We are concerned about proprietary information getting out into the cloud. So we're just taking baby steps at this point. But some colleagues have raised the issue about AI's impact on the environment. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert, but I was just touring a nuclear power plant, and I was also just at the Nashville Electric Service. We're doing some work for them. Both the nuclear power plant in Indiana and the Nashville Electric Service are considering allowing data centers built specifically for artificial intelligence to use their power. And I think they said that one data center is like 300 megawatts, or maybe it was, and it's like it's enough power to power like 20,000 homes. So basically, I may have some of those numbers a little off, but basically the environmental impact is that we are, in order to drive the training of these AI models, which takes thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of GPUs and these massive data centers, the effect of that on the environment is obvious, right? If you need to generate more energy, you need to extract more resources from the environment. You need to build more power plants. You need to, potentially pollute more. And so I think that's generally, when people are talking about the environmental impact of artificial intelligence, I think they're generally talking about these data centers and the massive cost. Like the Nashville Electric Service was talking about, yeah, I don't know if I can share exact numbers, but in order to add this data center, I can't share none, but they were having to add essentially a fair percentage of like their existing capacity just to get, those data centers online. And some power plants just won't take the data centers. They just don't want to deal with them. But yeah, I think that's generally what people are talking about.
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit. I know that uh, some of the work I used to do, we would look at data center their impact on the local area, specifically on the utility company, not so much the environment. And of course, all the GPUs and CPUs that you need also require air conditioning and cooling, and so that increases it even more. And some places they were proposing building a data center here, and they go to the power company and they're saying, "We can't do that. We don't have enough." And so there was a supply problem in addition to all that.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. I mean, right now, transformers are almost impossible to get a hold of. It takes years to get a hold of a transformer, which is a huge problem as power demand grows. And then these data centers just add to that.
John, you've got your hand up. Be sure to unmute yourself.
There.
Great.
I I put it on the space bar, but I have to have the cursor inside the window. Uh, as far as replacing humans, I'm fond of citing the story from history that I think is true enough. The weavers in France, in Paris, tossed the jacquard looms into the Seine because they were worried about losing their jobs.
Yes, yes, the Jacquard loom is a very famous example of technology replacing um, people. I mean, computers even used to be, people. You had human computers were people who did calculations and they got replaced by calculators. So, yeah, it does happen.
And of course, the outcome was that cloth became affordable by everybody, or many, 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 many more
Mhm,
people. Whereas prior to that, it was a very precious commodity. The
mhm,
other thing, have you ever heard the name Ken Boa? Are you familiar with him?
I've
His
mhm.
work?
heard it, but I've not read any of his work.
Uh, he's I'm not sure when the guy sleeps. He's an apologist, but he's labeled AI as algorithmic intelligence, not
Mm.
artificial
Ah,
intelligence. And I think that
uh-huh.
says that, there's a lot to.
Yeah, no, I think that is, yeah, that's a fantastic way of communicating a distinction.
Well, the weavers in France and some other examples, there's an economic concept of creative disruption. And you think of when people went from horse and buggy or on foot to everybody having cars, and it took a generation or a little bit more for cars to become so widespread. So the classic example is, oh, what'll happen to the poor buggy whip makers? They went out of business, but now we need a lot more mechanics because cars are a lot more complex than a horse and buggy are.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
fantastic example.
Well,
and it doesn't
and
mean that there's not pain associated with it, but you hinted at it in one of your earlier slides about the more technology we have, the more demand there is for something. So it
Yep.
changes it. And I'd also add, as Christians, the machine is not made in the image of God. We have a loving Father who oversees how
Amen.
we are, and He is not going to let us be fully replaced. We might have to adapt a whole lot and learn new stuff. That's not, God doesn't promise an easy life, but I just feel strongly that there's not a real threat there. There are good questions to be asked, but I don't feel threatened. Maybe I'm stupid.
Well, I think so. I mean, if you, I assume you guys have probably all read The Magician's Nephew, right? And
Mm-hmm.
when you think about the deplorable word of the witch, yeah, you can't help but think C.S. Lewis had a nuclear weapons in mind. But yeah, I think that we can trust God even if there is existential risk. For example, in Ukraine and Russia, they use artificial intelligence, or at least they're trying to put them in these drones that go
Hmm.
kill people, so that they don't need to communicate back because then the communications can't be jammed, and that's all kind of common knowledge. But I don't know if they've even achieved that. I don't study that much, but I think there is existential risk when you combine artificial intelligence and warfare, just like with nuclear weapons, there's existential risk. But so I wouldn't say there's no existential risk. However, just as Jesus, I agree with you, just as Jesus came at the right time in history, at the God appointed time, and just as it says, the death of his saints is precious in the eyes of the Lord. I do agree with you that God has a plan for history, and no matter what happens, as Christians, we certainly don't need to fear.
Yeah.
You know who else lost their jobs when the automobile replaced the horse and buggy, don't you? The horse poop picker up.
I actually did
Nice.
a little research on that subject and compared it to some stuff I wrote about SSDs. This was a few years ago. And the horse and buggy, the people who ran the horse and buggy businesses there were two different kinds of people who ran them. Uh, one group of people said, oh, the cars need a body, the interior of the body. And so they adapted their horse and buggy business to the automobile business. Those companies survived and ultimately
Mhm.
got bought up by the Ford and everybody else, GM and all that. The ones who chose not to do that, those are the ones who went out of business.
Yeah,
Interesting.
GM for years it was body by Fisher,
Yep.
and Fisher was the buggy.
Yep.
Any other thoughts, questions?
I'm paying Chat GPT $20 a month to help me with little scripting work I do,
Oh,
and
nice.
uh, and we go round and round. It is so stupid. It is. It tell me to do something and it doesn't work, and I'll point out, after I've troubleshot it, and it'll say, "Well, that doesn't work." And I says, "Well, why did you tell me that?"
It doesn't
Yeah,
have an.
so a couple problems with ChatGPT and writing code is that you really have to know what you're doing to know when it's giving you the right answer, right? It will try to use libraries that are not maintained or that are out of date, or it will I've actually had ChatGPT make up a Python library that doesn't even exist, and tell me to use it in my code. Now, there are some code specific models like Claude by Anthropic generally does a little better than ChatGPT with code, in my opinion. And then you have these companies like GitHub Copilot is designed specifically to help coders, and you can install it inside your integrated development environments, and it's a little bit better with code. And I think where AI really shines for me with code is if you want to do something in your code base that let's say it's going to take 100 lines of code, and let's say that people do it all the time. It's like there are a million examples of it on the internet, and I just don't want to have to write those 100 lines of code. If I tell my code AI to write those 100 lines of code, it just nails it every time because it has so many good examples. For the most part, like so doing repetitive tasks that it has lots of good examples for that you just don't want to do, it can save a significant amount of time. But I do think that you do have to have a certain amount of skill in doing it, or like you said, you just have to do it until it gives you what works.
Robert.
Yes, I've been going through Romans with a Bible study group,
Fun.
and I go into Chat GPT and I just say, "Tell me about Romans chapter 8." and I'm amazed at how fast it produces information that I say is very accurate. I check it carefully, but it gives me all kinds of different perspectives on different ideas. And sometimes it says there's a debate on this subject, and I just go in and say, tell me more about the debate. And it'll give me several different insights on the debate. And I'll say, is there any more? And I've had it give me something like 8 different perspectives on a debate subject. So that's,
Yeah, no, I agree completely, Robert. I think that ChatGPT can be very useful for Bible study. I will say, I think what AI is really useful for in general is learning things that are on the internet where there's a lot of data. So there's obviously a lot of Bible discussion on the internet. Um, and so I think that especially with ChatGPT or deep research, it can summarize what's out there fairly well when you're asking kind of a normal question. So I think it's great for brainstorming. I think it's generally good for very quick overviews. I think where it really breaks down for me in Bible study is if I need more nuance, like if you want to get into the Greek or the Hebrew, or if you just want to think about the cultural background of the text. Sometimes it's pretty good, but a lot of times I need to go read a paper on Google Scholar or go to like netbible.org to get some, or pull out my IVP Bible background commentary. So I think ChatGPT is great to get you from either zero, like if you're on a scale of 0 to 10 in terms of knowledge, I think it can get you from like 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 to 4 or something. Like it can pretty quickly get you up to speed on what the debates are, like you said, like what a lot of different views are. But I think that gap from like level 4 to level 10 where you've really studied it deeply is like I still think there's a gap there. But I 100% agree that it's very useful for getting quick Bible info. And I'm glad you brought up Romans 8 because that's I used to know it by heart. I confess I don't know the whole thing by heart anymore, but I know most of it. It's one of my favorite passages. I love the whole passage. You know, so then, brothers, no longer obligated to the flesh to live according to the flesh. For you live according to the flesh, you're going to die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. And of course, the ending of Romans, neither death nor angel life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing will separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus. I mean, just like, yeah, Paul is just brilliant in Romans. I love it.
So here's a question. If I may, I don't want to dominate.
Yeah, go for it, John.
Um, there's an article in the 15th The Economist, AI is killing the web. Um, when when so much like for coders for going to get answers and stuff, well, I don't go to Stack Exchange or the places I used to go,
Stack Overflow, yeah.
Stack Overflow. I asked Chat GPT. And so it has mined these sites to the point that nobody's answering questions on the sites anymore. So, there's kind of a negative feedback loop there as far as diminishing valid content to my.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic point. And I've thought about this, but I don't have a anything much deeper than what you said because I know it's a problem. And I don't know where it's going yet because what some of the AI companies do when they run out of internet data is they pay real coders to come get like I forget, I'm pretty sure I read an article that said one of the companies just paid professional coders in their company to do nothing but generate examples to improve certain parts of the code base. But I agree that so much esoteric knowledge, like I use Stack Overflow for years, and it's actually really kind of sad to see it, yeah, if we see it go, because I would ask questions on Stack Overflow that I'm not even sure were in the tech specs and there would be somebody on there who knew just this random esoteric thing that I needed to know. And so I 100% agree that it's possible that there will be, just like we talked about there being intellectual atrophy as a result of people using ChatGPT, there could be some impact on the dissemination of knowledge through the internet. And in addition to that, there are websites and social influencers now using AI to generate their content. So in that sense, even the internet is becoming less useful to get human generated data because a lot of the data is AI generated. So yeah, I think the dilution of the internet is certainly a concern, and I'm not sure where that's gonna end up.
This isn't an ethical issue, but it's like Stack Overflow, many sites, as referenced in the article I cited from The Economist. They depend on ad revenue, and when their clicks through, when people aren't searching but using the chat engines, they're not getting page views, so they're not getting advertising revenue, and
Yep.
so that's just a different fact.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I necessarily like the ad revenue, the attention-driven internet economy. I don't know that that's been good for humanity either. But no, I agree that the chatbots are certainly changing the economics. I heard on a podcast there was one of the folks from Google was actually talking about how they're trying to adapt to this changing business model that these agents are presenting to them. I don't remember the details of the episode, but I do recall that certainly this is something that all of the big search engine companies are keeping squarely in their sites.
So I have a question about this, what I'm going to call pollution of the internet by, you know, by the AI engines. I'll just say making stuff up, for lack of a better term. So is somebody going to propose that AI fix that, or is this something that AI cannot fix because it can't tell the difference?
So the existing AI technologies cannot tell truth from error unless you give them ground truth. So like one thing you could do if you save the historical internet and you call that ground truth, then you could compare new content to that to at least maintain like a historical truth. But as far as I know, no one, and I mean, people are doing something new every day, so I could this could be totally wrong. But as far as I know, there's no method or no one's considering a way to remove the pollution yet. I think people just know, yeah, that's a problem. Now, I think if we get new neural network architectures that so for example if you there's something called reinforcement learning, which the quick way of explaining it is the same way that you train a dog to fetch a ball by giving it a treat whenever it fetches the ball. You can train an algorithm to optimize some problem by giving it an award whenever it optimizes the problem well. Like when the AI models beat the world's best chess players, they use this reinforcement learning to play the game chess. And some companies they try to use reinforcement learning to teach the large language model to be more truthful within some bounds. So certainly this question of can you I've not heard of anyone trying to clean up the internet, but the question of can you make the models care more about whether they're right or wrong somehow, certainly that question is at the forefront of everyone's mind.
Yeah, and then to take it to the next level, let's suppose you could go back to this historically, I'm going to say pristine version of the internet before AI got in and messed everything up. And I'm exaggerating here. Um, would the AI, even if it was limited to the, what I'll call the pristine or the historical version, would it still be able to tell from the humans who were truthful and who were not? And I'll give an example of this. a computer game was available, and some people they were coming out with a new version, and so some people wrote up this big article about what the new version was like. And of course, these were not the developers. This was just some people, and they did it on purpose to fool the AI things, so they knew the AI things would pick up on it and say, "Oh yeah, it's going to have these features," and of course it didn't. They did
Yeah,
it.
no,
They did it.
they can't tell the difference unless you like restrict them to certain websites or something. They can't tell truth from error without ground truth.
Yeah, so I think there's still a fundamental problem, even if they could identify the AI generated errors, they still wouldn't be able to tell the human errors, which are either due to somebody being sloppy or somebody actually doing disinformation.
Yep, no, I agree.
If you look at your window, there's a little AI companion in Zoom. Reckon what that does.
I'll have to ask it what it thinks of our meeting afterward.
So, Sean, I've what I say is that it'll never make it because the thing that distinguishes humans, part of our image bearer uh, likeness, is that I don't think, and who knows, but I don't think it'll ever have an imagination. And I hadn't seen that it doesn't have emotion. That hadn't. That's cool.
Yes, yes, agreed. Yeah, I pray it doesn't make it actually, because I think the social ramifications would be, um, yeah, very, very bizarre and probably not entirely beneficial.
Well, but I think imagination is a human distinctive.
Yes, it could be. I don't, that's not my area of expertise, but that would make sense.
I guess it depends on how you define imagination, like that digital art that you showed us. And again, in an example from my employer a couple of weeks ago, I had a team developing a proposal that was very competitive. And one thing they wanted to do was put some AI generated art on the cover of their proposal. There was a specific reason they chose to do that. It did have to do with the content of the proposal. And so they told it what they wanted, and it came up with a picture. And I said, our policies allow that. I'm an editor, so I'm not a gatekeeper exactly, but I'm the one that's calling all the details to everybody's attention. I said, our policies allow that, but please let's let our graphics manager look at it. And I had seen it and thought, oh, that's kind of ugly, but if they're happy with it, okay. The graphics manager took one look and said, why does this guy have 6 fingers? Because she just, as a graphics manager, she thinks about things differently than I do. She sees things differently than I do. I'm good with words, but I could not do what she does. And she conversely always wants me to check any text that's in any of her work. We need each other. And while AI did a passable job of this picture, it took a human to say, no, humans don't have 6 fingers.
Yeah, I mean, I think currently it is true, 100% true, 110%. AI has no imagination. So, um, and going back to functionalism, AI cannot, it's not thinking, it's not feeling. So, not like when something gives you an intelligent response, you assume it thought about it first. But the way that neural networks work, actually, the AI is not thinking anything. It has no imagination. It has no picture in its mind. Um, and I mean, I think what a functionalist would argue is that when you imagine, your brain is just like, it's the way the neurons are interacting or whatever. Um, but but current technology certainly is not thinking or feeling or imagining. And the 6 finger problem, I think they've fixed that. I mean, that was a huge problem. I remember seeing pictures with 6 fingers, and I was always annoyed because I was trying to, produce these cool scenes, and like it just kept giving me these weird 6 fingered people with like slightly distorted looking faces and stuff. And but I think that's something they can solve. So I don't think that's unsolvable, but whether they solve that or not, yeah, certainly the model is not imagining anything. It's just generating something based on its training data.
Mm-hmm. And this was just a couple of weeks ago. So yes, that probably can be solved, but as of recently, it wasn't. On the other hand, I have colleagues and peers who remind us that AI is as bad now as it's ever going to be. It will get better in some ways, but I don't think better entails sentience or imagination, and certainly not the Imago Dei.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And yes, yeah, I think so there's a company, what are they called? They can take a picture, and from the picture, like it could be a picture of your family around the table, it could be a picture of Narnia, it could be a picture of anything, and then they can generate a 3D world just from the 2D picture, and then you can like walk around in the 3D world, which is pretty insane. So I think the image domain and the video domain and the voice domain, those domains are some of the easy, like text, image, voice, video. Video is the hardest, certainly, because you're almost trying to replicate the laws of physics. But I think that I mean, I would anticipate in the next 10 years, we'll have solved a lot of hurdles because there's billions of dollars being poured into those domains.
Which presumably means they're paying a whole bunch of people to do some real work to solve this problem, as opposed to buying more computers to do AI to do it.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yes, yeah. Yes.
All right, this has been great. Any more questions or comments?
Just very quickly, somewhere in my apologetics readings, um, somebody noted that as far as technological advancements and everything, uh, men 5 and 6 and 8,000 years ago had the exact same natural resources available to them that we have today. And yet, technological advancements, have made life a little bit different. And we would likely say, in general, a little better. I'm fond of reminding this household, you really don't want to be a settler in 1888 Montana.
Well, yeah, I mean, infant mortality. So, Bill, there's some very famous charts about how society's gotten better. One of them is infant mortality. Infant mortality, I mean, I don't know if anyone here knows the percentages, but I'm pretty sure it was upwards of 20, 30, 40, I mean, 40%. Many children. I mean, George MacDonald, who's a famous Christian author, as you guys know, several of his children died of illnesses that we can now prevent when they were 16 or fairly young. Many mothers died in childbirth, but that's extraordinarily rare in the developed world today. Poverty is much lower today than it has been historically. Disease is on the path to being eradicated. So I certainly don't think that we need to be doom and gloom. There are a lot of benefits that technology brings. That's a great point.
Great. Anybody else? Well, thanks very much, Sean. This has been very enlightening, a great discussion. I think we're getting thumbs up from everybody here. So thank you very much. And let's close with a word of prayer.
Sounds like a
Father,
plan.
thanks for this chance to get together and look at some of the technologies that are happening and the good news and the bad news that comes with those. Thanks for Sean's preparation and his work in the industry and for this great presentation and the great topics that we've discussed tonight. We want to use this information for your glory, so we can lead others to you. We pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Dennis, for the invitation. This has been really fun, and thanks
Thanks.
everyone. It was good meeting you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Sean.
all. Thank you, Sean. Good night.
All right. Good night, all.